Hi everyone. I welcome all of you to another session on understanding contemporary economic issues. Today, what we are going to discuss is a chapter on the Economic Survey 1920. Unfortunately, this is written as 1910. It should have been 1920. Now, the chapter that we are going to cover is the last chapter of the volume 2, which is social infrastructure, employment, and human development. Now, this chapter is extremely important, not only for your examination, eco honors, but also for people who are preparing for civil services, especially from prelims point of view. This is not as important for mains, but yes, for prelims, this is a very important topic or a very important chapter. So, what we are going to discuss today is basically what all interventions has the government undertaken in the human resource sector and the social sector, so to say. The overall sector is called as the social sector. We'll talk about issues in terms of employment, in terms of sustainable development, in terms of housing, and we will also talk about the expenditure that the government does on education and health. So, all in all, we are going to talk about something towards social infrastructure. So, just to demarcate this well, in an economy, we have two kinds of infrastructure that you can invest in. So, infrastructure can be divided into physical infrastructure and social infrastructure. Now, a lot of emphasis in traditional economics is given to physical infrastructure. By physical infrastructure, we mean all the capital expenditures on something like roads or bridges. So all that physical elements of airways, ports, all of that comes under physical infrastructure. In social infrastructure, mainly we talk about health and education, but there are other things as well. So in health and education are the two major areas. But apart from that, we are going to not just talk about this, we are going to talk about inclusiveness that is there in the economy. We're going to talk about the kind of measures that the government has taken for employment and employment for males versus females. So is the employment inclusive or not, or is the growth inclusive or not? We were going to talk about interventions that the government has done in terms of social security. So all of this is under social infrastructure, and this gains much more importance this year because of COVID-19. And historically, we have not been investing in health sector. Neither we have been investing in education sector, and that has perhaps come to haunt us in the 21st century because of the what has happened in the last 70 years. So we'll understand all of that through our reading of this paper. Now, let's first talk about the issues. Now, in terms of expenditure on social services, we'll see that the government has been increasing since 2014-15. When the 2015 onwards, the government of India has been spending a lot of money on the social services, and we will see that how has that happened. And we'll see overall we'll focus on three areas. One area that we'll focus on is education. The second area that we'll talk about is healthcare, and the third area we'll talk about is employment. These are the three major areas out of which questions will be asked and questions can be asked. But apart from that, there are other incidental issues also covered in this chapter. Now, issues to be covered: healthy society. Ayushman Bharat is a scheme which we'll talk about. Then we'll talk about clean and housing for all, clean lit city, cooking facilities, housing for all. We'll talk about piped water supply to rural sector, and women entrepreneurship. But let's start our discussion today with the trends in social sector expenditure. Now, when we talk about the trends in social sector expenditure, we see that over the years, the expenditure as a percent of GDP. So there are so many numbers here to understand. but the aggregate numbers that you need to learn is as a percentage of GDP. This is the key figure. And if you see that from 2014-15 onwards, this was 6%. As a combined share of states and center, 6% of GDP was spent on social services, and now somewhere around 7.5% is being 7.6% has been spent. So it's an increase of 1.5 percentage points that has happened across 5 years. Apart from that, if you see the further bifurcation, that you need to understand and learn is that around 3% is being spent on education and 1.5% is being spent on health. This is abysmally low. So this should have been for a country of the size of India, this should have been somewhere around 6%. This should have somewhere been around 3%. So that is what is holding us back in terms of social infrastructure and social sector altogether. And I've also marked what all is included. If you can see, social services include health and education, that I've already told you. But apart from that, water supply and sanitation, housing, urban development, development and welfare of the SC, ST and OBC, labor welfare, social security. So all of this comes under social security, but the prime focus, one of the major focus, has to be on healthcare and education, which takes a lion's share of the social sector, which is 4.5% of the GDP. Now, apart from this, if you see India's development over the Human Development Index. Now, Human Development Index basically judges and ranks all the countries in the world on basis of three parameters. One is the longevity of life and healthy life. The other is how educated and knowledgeable is the society, and the third is the standard of living in the society. So basically, this is for literacy. This is for basically how much GDP are you producing, and this is for health. So these are the three parameters on which broad parameters on which the HDI is computed. And if you see our rank in HDI according to the UNDP, it's 129, which is at the very low end of the spectrum. However, if we see annually our improvement for the last few years, ours has been a very fast improvement of 1.34% average annual growth as compared to other countries. However, in absolute terms, we are way behind our contemporaries. Then let's talk about education, which is an essential thing to talk about. Now, education, there are two ways to analyze education. One is through a ratio called gross enrollment ratio, that how many students are getting enrolled in a particular level of schooling or education. So you have the overall education sector divided into four parts. You have an elementary education, then you have the secondary education, senior secondary education, and higher education. If you see, we have achieved almost 100% enrollment ratio, almost 100% enrollment ratio in the primary level. So up to class 5, we have almost 100% enrollment ratio, and that's because of a number of schemes which the government used to run. Now these schemes have been merged. There used to be a scheme called Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan. There used to be a scheme. There's still a scheme, midday meal scheme. So because of this and because of a huge emphasis on primary education, we have perhaps achieved 100% enrollment ratio. But this enrollment ratio drops to somewhere around 80% when we talk about secondary education. Secondary education typically is from class 6 to class 10, and that is where the problem lies, that this is still at 80%. And if we go further ahead to somewhere to the senior secondary level, we are talking about class 11 and class 12, this drops to somewhere around 55-60%. And when we talk about overall, when we talk about higher education, people who go to colleges or take professional education, vocational education, all of that goes somewhere around 25%. So this is a steep fall that is happening in the education sector. So we need to improve the gross enrollment ratio of both the secondary and the senior secondary at the senior secondary level. Now, there is a survey that we are going to talk about here. This survey is by the NSS, the National Sample Survey of Key Indicators of Household Social Consumption on Education. This is the survey that we are going to talk about, and this survey actually shows the reasons behind people leave education, and how higher education in India or basic education in India is not affordable. The average expenditure that happens on in terms of an academic year for a particular student, 50% of that is on the course fees, whereas 20% is on the stationery items, and rest is on the other expenses. So one of the features that that the government can do, and which the government also does, is that how you can reduce the course fees, how you can improve on or give this money directly to the to the parents so that they can pay the fees. So this is one area, this is one challenge that the government is facing in terms of education. Then if we compare the education level and the expenditure level, the expenditure level of the private sector education is much higher than the public sector education. If you can see the average expenditure per student for a type of institution, if it's a if it's a government institution like yours, like Gargi College, the average fees across all government colleges for say for all kind of education is just 3,000 rupees. But if you see that for private aided institutions, this is approximately 14,000 rupees, and this difference is very wide when we talk about pre-primary level. So even if we ignore this, one of the major concerns is the difference in the fees and the affordability for higher education, or in general the overall education, the private versus the government education system. Now, what have been the schemes to promote education in school, especially school education? This is something that you should note, which is important, that the government of India subsumed three schemes. There were three schemes being run: the Sarv Shiksha Abhiyan, centrally sponsored scheme; the Rashtriya Madhyamik Shiksha Abhiyan, which was for secondary education; and teacher education. These three schemes have been merged into Samagra Shiksha in 2018-19. So this is an integrated scheme by Department of School Education and Literacy. So three schemes have been merged to form one particular scheme. This is one change that has happened. The other is, instead of focusing just on the enrollment ratios, the government of India has also started focusing on the learning outcomes. So there was a lot of issues in terms of the quality of education. There are certain reports like ASER, Annual Survey of Education report. There's another across OECD countries. There's another survey called PISA. Now, according to both of them, the quality of students that we are producing on an average are extremely poor, because our focus primarily has been on gross enrollment ratio. That how can we enroll more students, rather than, so our focus has been on quantity rather than our focus should be on quality of education. That's why the central RTE rules were amended, and class-wise and subject-wise learning outcomes were added. That after completing a course, what should be the improvement level in a particular student when he takes this that particular course. Then you have other schemes like Narvodaya Vidyalaya scheme, which is providing one school in each district, which targets extremely talented rural students. Then you have other schemes like Nishcha scheme. You can give a read about it, and other schemes like Dhruv and Diksha. But the schemes that you need to perhaps learn more is these Samagra Shiksha and the Jawahar Narvodaya Vidyalayas. So these are important, and the changes in the central RTE rules. Now, for higher education, we have another scheme, which is Pandit Madan Mohan Malviya National Mission for Teachers and Teaching. This is basically improvement and capacity building for teachers. So and this is especially for higher education, college teachers and professional post teachers. So this is a government scheme for them. Then you have another scheme which you can probably mention is the HIFA, which is Higher Education Financing Agency. Now the government colleges and all the aided institutions of government can actually take a loan from this particular organization and then invest in R&D or whatever infrastructure that it wants. So it's a low interest rate financing agency, whereby the government institutes can take loan instead of the grants that it has been getting till now. So that's more or less our discussion on education. This is primarily what we wanted to discuss. Now, coming on skill development, which is perhaps an ancillary to education itself. Now, the periodic labor force survey 2017-18 talks about the fact that in our country, around 13% of the workforce in the productive age has received some training. So imagine what we are saying is that the skill, in terms of skill development, only 13% of our entire workforce is somewhat skilled. Now, of this 13%, 11% is the informal sector, and only 2% of our workforce in the formal sector. So out of a total workforce, so workforce, I'll define what workforce is: people who are employed in the country. So people who are working in the country in the age group of 15 to 59. This is the age, this is the productive age group that we are going to talk about. And of this, people who are working, this ratio is called as work participation rate, workforce participation rate, or work participation rate. Now, the problem is that of the entire people who are working, which is somewhere around 500 million, 50 crore people in India in this age group are working. Of this, only 2% are skilled in the formal sector. So that is what is being highlighted here. That in the periodic labor force survey, 13% of the workforce in the productive age group has received some training, which is only 2.26% of formal vocational training. So only 2% have got formal training and 11% have got informal training. So in this, not sector, formal training, sorry, and informal training. So if you see, out of a workforce of 500 million, only 2% of the entire workforce is formally trained. Now, if you compare this to a country like, say, Japan, in Japan, 80% of its workforce is formally trained. In Korea, of course, we are going to talk about South Korea, 96% of its workforce is formally trained, whereas in India, this percentage is just 2%. See the stark differences in this level of skills. This is the skill deficit that exists in India. That's why a huge emphasis is now being given on skill development, both formal and informal skills. Now, coming to our discussion. Now, the government of India had launched the Skill India mission, and it implements under the Skill India, government implements the Pradhan Mantri Kaushal Vikas Yojana 2016-2020. And if you see state-wise, if you can also analyze that how many are formally trained and how many informally trained. You'll invariably find out the southern states are doing well in terms of formal education, because the kind of education system that they have is much better, whereas all other states, the northern and the middle and the western states, are lagging behind. So states with good education system are providing better formally trained workforce. But overall, still, if you see the level of workforce which is receiving any kind of skill is pretty low. Now, let's talk about another factor which is just related to this only, the skill development or the employment sector. And this is very important for you guys. The status of employment, when we'll talk about especially the formal versus informal employment. You need to learn a table for that. Now, the government of India has been spending a lot towards increasing the employment in the country. How has the government done that? The government has NREGA, the Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme. Then the government has Prime Minister Employment Generation Program. You have Gramin Kaushal Yojana. You have Deen Dayal Antyodaya Yojana, which is basically National Urban Livelihood Mission. So these are the four major schemes through which the government targets the employment sector. Now, if we see the estimates now for this, for to understand this entire thing, that what is the employment status, you need to learn about a couple of things. Now, there are some definitions for employment. Now, what are these definitions? Let's understand this first. Now, the first thing that you need to understand is something called labor force. What is labor force? Labor force basically comprises of people who are employed, who are in the age group, who are in the age group of 15 to 59, who are wanting to work, whether they are employed or not employed. That doesn't matter. Your willingness to work is very important, and this age group is important. And if you divide labor force by total population, you will get labor force participation rate, that how many people want to enter the job market. Now, we will analyze this for both males and females, and we will see that this labor force participation rate has been falling for females, and this fall has been very steep in the last few years. Now, then there is something called workforce. What is workforce? Of this age group of 15 to 59, how many people are actually employed? So workforce over total population will be the work participation ratio. This again we can see for males and females. The difference between labor force participation rate and workforce participation rate can give you an extent of unemployment. So this is one method of calculating unemployment. Now, to check for the status of employment. Now, another concept that you need to understand is the status of employment. The status of employment can be gauged by a number of factors. One of the factors is what is called as usual status, which is also called UP plus SS, usual principal plus subsidiary status. This is called as usual principal plus subsidiary. Now, what does this mean? Now, to classify anyone to be employed, two factors can be seen. Now, a person can be employed in a principal activity, which can be his main activity. Now, this you need to understand that what is the difference between these two terms. Principal activity is the main occupation, that is called as principal activity, and main occupation which is done for more than 180 days or 182 days in a year. If a person is employed in certain activity for more than 180 days in a year in a particular in one particular job, that is called as his principal status. For example, a farmer may be employed or a farmer may be doing farming for more than 180 days, so his principal activity is farming. But however, between the season of harvest and sowing, the farmer might also migrate to an urban area and work as a construction worker. So there can be certain subsidiary activity as well. Now, subsidiary activity is an activity that you have done for 30 days in a year. So farmer can both be can have two things. Can be a farmer for more than 180 days, but can also have subsidiary status as a construction worker. So this is the most expansive form of definition, because it considers any person employed if first he is employed for more than 180 days, even if that person is not employed for 180 days. For example, a person says in a survey, no, that I am not employed in the last reference period year. I was not employed in farming for 180 days. So the next question is that, did you do a subsidiary activity like construction for 30 days? If he says yes, then he will still be marked as employed. So this is a very broad definition. This is the broadest definition of employment, because you are going to consider both the principal work as well as the subsidiary work. Now there's another way that you can go for towards it. Then you have something called you have other status as well, which I'm not going to go into. There's something called current weekly status, current daily status. So you have something called current weekly status, you have something called current daily status. But apart from that, there is something called we can also analyze on the basis of only principal activity, and we can also analyze on the basis of only subsidiary activity. So what you need to understand is the difference between UPSS and UPS, or simply SS. So if we talk about employment on the basis of only subsidiary activity, we are going to talk about that if a person was employed in any subsidiary work for 30 days. You will find that in our discussion that a lot of women work for in subsidiary activities. So they are not employed in the farming activity or in any other kind of activity, but because of something like NREGA, they can be employed for subsidiary work for 30 days. So this is our discussion towards the status of employment. And in India, we consider UPSS as the benchmark for considering the employment or the unemployment ratio. Now, this is what is being discussed here. That the usual status is basically going to tell you about the entire reference year, and it is divided. One is the principal status and the other is subsidiary status. The principal status measures the activity which longer time has spent majority of the time, which is 182 days, while subsidiary status measures the individual who has spent a majority of days out of the workforce but has worked for a short period more than 30 days. So as I told you that this is the broadest definition once you take principal status plus subsidiary status. If a person is unemployed both according to principal and subsidiary status, that means that is acute unemployment. That person has not even worked for 30 days in the entire year. That shows very acute problem in the economy. So this is how we discuss this. Apart from that, there's one more concept that I wanted to discuss. That was the workers. The NSO actually classifies workers on the basis of three categories: self-employed workers, people who are themselves employed. Then you have regular and wage and salaried employees like me. And then you have casual workers, something like daily wagers. So people who take their wages on a daily basis. So this is the classification for on the basis of employment. Now, having done the basics of what employment is and how you consider employment, now the periodic labor force survey that happened in 2017-2018 had certain interesting figures to give. One was that if we compare 2011-2012 to 2017-2018, if you see the wages or the people who are in the regular wages, so regular wages and salaried workers actually increased by 5 percentage points. This is one thing that you need to take forward, that this has happened in the Indian economy, that the proportion of salaried workers have increased and the proportion of unpaid family labor has decreased. These are two things that you need to draw from there. This is what is mentioned here, that as a percentage, the proportion of people who are salaried workers have increased in the Indian economy. That means kind of the fact that we have improved in terms of formal employment. Then talking about proportion of women workers who are salaried have also increased by 8 percentage points. If you go by the next figure, we are classifying this on the basis of gender. If you see, the number of women who are classified as salaried workers has increased by 8 percentage point here. So these are the two things that you can draw, that the salaried workers are increasing, and within the salaried workers the major impetus has been on female salaried workers. That's one particular thing. The other thing that I wanted you to know was that how is the distribution across in the entire employment market, how is the distribution? So this is 47 crore people being employed, which is, or you can roughly translate this into 500 million, 50 crores. And of that, almost 50% people are self-employed. And if you see the other half, approximately 25 and 25% people are casual workers and regular employed. And if you see, there has been a huge improvement in the employment of regular wage people, and that is what we were talking about, that from 18% to 23-24%. So that is the rough calculation that I've done, that this is how you should remember this, that 50% of people are self-employed and approximately 25% people are there in the regular and the casual employment sector. Now, moving further towards formalization of labor force. Now, what do we mean by formalization of labor force? For that, you need to understand that what is formal sector and what is informal sector. Now, formal sector and informal sector is extremely important for you to understand, because this definition for formal and informal comes in very handy in a lot of answers. Now, let's see what is formal and what is informal. We will compare this to what is organized and what is unorganized. Now, a lot of people actually confuse between and think that all of this is interchangeable. So all you need to do is understand what is formal. You can automatically understand what is informal, and you need to understand what is organized or what is unorganized. So in any organization where more than 10 people are working, that organization has to follow a lot of labor laws. So all of these organizations are actually counted in the organized sector. So to understand this, see this unorganized sector. So it actually explains the counterpart of it. The unorganized sector is all unincorporated private enterprises. So first of all, everything which is government is going to be formal, is going to be in the organized sector. Now, it only takes into account unincorporated, so which is not by the company law, which is not corporatized. Private enterprises which are engaging in the sale and purchase of goods and services, and with less than 10 total workers. So if we talk about this is going to talk about non-government private enterprises which are not corporatized and less than 10 people working. All of this comes under the unorganized sector. Now, let's move forward towards what is the informal workers. Informal workers are majority in a very majority sense are in the unorganized enterprises. They exclude regular workers with social security and workers in the formal sector without any employment benefits. So if you do not get any benefits of a regular employee, if you do not get any social security from your employer, that all comes under the informal sector. So let's define it here. So you will find an overlap between these two. So where first, no employment benefits, no social security, and no regular salary. So That is how you define informal and formal. So the complement of this will be the formal sector, and there will be an overlap between the formal and the organized sector. Now, why is this important? Why is this extremely important? Because we need to see the ratios of formal and informal sector in the Indian economy. We need to see that how many people are there in the unorganized sector, how many people are there in the organized sector, the total, how many people are there in the informal sector, how many people are there in the formal sector, and the total. This is a very important table for you to understand and to learn. We'll go ahead and learn this table now in a few moments. Let's first talk about what we were discussing. So let's actually see this table, that how many people. Remember, we were talking about that there are 47 million people, or 47 crore people, or 470 million people in the Indian workforce. Now, how are they distributed? Now, 19% of your entire workforce of 500 million people that you have, approximately 20%, only 20% are in the organized sector, and 81% are in the unorganized sector. So this is one key figure that you need to learn. Remember, this is a very important table. Whether you're talking about any examination that you're going to talk about, this table will come extremely handy to explain the problems in the employment sector of India. So, organized and unorganized, you need to remember that organized has only 19% and this has 81%. So this is one key figure that you need to understand. Informal, we will see that informal has 90% and this has 10%. So overall, this sum should always be 100. This is how this table should be. These are very easy to learn, 80 20 and 90 10. Now all you need to do is fill these figures. Now the problem here was that these are figures given according to percentage of organized sector. So I've converted them into as a percentage of the total employment. So if you see formal and organized, there are 9% people there. Then you have informal and organized, then you have 10% people there. So formal and organized, you have 9% people here, and formal and informal and organized, you have 10% people here. This is the table. See, formal and organized, you have 48%, or you have 4 crore people here. So I've just converted this into percentages and this also into percentages. So informal and organized has 10% and has 10%. Informal and organized has 10%, and formal and organized has 9%. So total is again 19%. Now, if you remember these, all you need to remember is 3 things. You remember this, and you remember one of these figures. So you can remember this. If you remember these 3 figures, your entire table is ready, because now you need to just fill in all of the other details. So this will be 80, this will be 1, and your table is completed. So just learn 3 of these figures and your entire table is ready. Now, to understand what we are doing is that if we see that a majority of our workforce is in the informal sector. So whatever issues that we have, for example, if you see the huge exodus that is happening across the country, that the entire exodus that is happening, the migrating people or people who are actually under a lot of financial trouble, is because they do not have any formal employment. So their lives are vulnerable because of the stagnation of the economy right now. So this is the problematic area, that a lot of people are in the informal sector. We need to see that how we can convert them into formal organized sector. Now there is one strange thing about this entire table, which is the informal organized, that while you are in the organized sector, you assume that once you are in the organized sector, you have to be in the formal sector. For example, in Gargi College, I'm in the formal and organized sector. But imagine someone like a security guard or a sweeper. So if they are not on the contractual roles, if they are casual labor or they are given wages on a daily basis, then they become informal, and but they are working in an organized sector. So when all of these type C, type D jobs are actually outsourced, contractualized, they become informal jobs, but in the organized sector. This is the table that I want you to understand. This is according to the 2017-2018 data, and I want you to memorize this table. Now, if you see what has happened across time, if you see between 2004 till now, 2004, 2005 till 2017, 2018, we have a huge improvement that has happened in, or some improvement that has happened in the organized sector, that we've been able to perhaps add 5.5% population in the organized sector. However, the kind of addition that we have done has majorly in the informal organized sector. So what we have done is we have added a lot of people from the in the informal organized sector. Basically, we have done a lot of contractualization of jobs. That is what we are trying to identify. Now, moving forward towards the gender dimension of employment. Now, I've already talked about the labor force participation rate, the definition of labor force participation rate, and the worker population ratio, the people who are working. The problem in India is that the labor force participation rate for women in the age group of 15 to 59 has consistently been falling. From in 1993, 1994, it was somewhere around 45%. That means 45% of women in India in this age group were ready to work. But right now, or ready to work in a job, now only 25% are ready to work. So this ratio has crashed down. That shows that labor force participation rate, females in the economy are not ready to enter the labor force. So that shows there is a huge problem. So labor force participation rate, males versus females, as a ratio C, there's a steep decline that has happened. The total decline C, as compared to males, only 30% of females are, as compared to males, only 30% of females are ready to work. So we need to see how we can change this. And all the definitions are given here. I've already explained you the definitions. Now, if we go deeper into the analysis, we see that actually what has happened, if we see the principal status, not a lot has happened, but in the subsidiary status, a lot has happened. From 27% in 1993, 2000 and 1994, only 5% of females are entering in the subsidiary status. That means, remember the 30-day, more than 30 days, that females are now not working as casual labor. Females in India are not entering the labor market for casual for 30 days, 20 days, for 30 days, 40 days. So any subsidiary activity, like for example, manufacturing of textiles, that could increase this, or NRE, something in NREGA. So all of that, females in India are not entering into any subsidiary activities. While there has been a decline in the principal activity as well, but the decline has been more precipitous in the subsidiary status. So this is what is mentioned here, that who are engaged in the subsidiary status has declined drastically from 25% to 5%. This basically means female workers who had stable jobs continue to work while, so stable jobs means in the principal status, while those who are not full-time workers, who are part-time workers, part-time female employees have actually left the market. Now what are and if we see, now we want to get into the fact that why females have left this part-time job. So what we have done is we have divided the entire job market into three age groups: 15 to 29, the early age group, then the middle age group 30 to 59, and the overall age group 59 to 30. Now, if you see what has happened between 2004, 2005, and 17, 18, although the unemployment, so out of workforce means that people who are either not in the, so you need to know the concept of out of workforce. Workforce. Who are the people out of workforce who are not employed? So people who are unemployed and people who are not ready to work. These are the only two things. Out of labor force means not ready to work. Unemployment means that they're ready to work but they're not getting employment. So if you see, the unemployment rate has not changed. But what has happened is that within the age group of 15 to 29, the early age group, a lot of women have now started enrolling themselves in higher education. So only 15% of women were enrolling in education in higher education in 2004 2015. Now 30% of women are enrolling. So what has happened is that what has happened is that females are now trying to attain more education, and if you're trying to attain more education, what will happen? You will delay your entry. You will delay your entry in the labor force. So consider yourself. Had you been open to working after class 12, you would have been in the labor force market. But because you guys have entered, you guys have started, you have enrolled yourself in Gargi College. Because of that, you have delayed your entry into the labor force. Similarly, if you after your bachelor's in economics, if you further go for higher studies, say masters in economics, then what will happen? You will further delay your entry into the labor force by another 2 years. After those 2 years, then you will enter the labor force and perhaps the workforce. So that is one of the reasons why the the women, the labor force participation rate for females have declined. But another critical problem is that a lot of women have also left the labor market because of 50% of women have left the labor market because of they are attending domestic duties. So because of domestic work, childcare work, remaining at home, all of those reasons have 50% of women are not entering the labor market. So that is one of the most problematic issues, and this ratio has been increasing. So this ratio overall from 45% to 60%. So this is a major problem that women are attending to domestic duties rather than coming into the labor market. This all is explained here. Now, and if you further distribute this according to age groups, then you will find that only if you're graduate or above, then only 5% of females are attending domestic duties, but the rest of them who are up to secondary level are actually doing domestic duty. So higher will be the education, lesser will be the chance that you will be attending the domestic duties. That means lesser will be the chance that you will not be entering the labor market. There will be more chance for you to enter the labor market if your education level increases. Now, the next part explains the reasons behind declining labor force participation. The reasons for declining labor force participation is both from the supply side and from the demand side. From the supply side, one of the reasons is that because the women are not entering the market because they are pursuing higher education, therefore the supply of women labor force is less, and that is why there has been a fall. So this is one supply side reason. The other is that because there has been higher income, higher wage rate increase in the rural sector, especially between 2004 till 2015. In this period, the wages, the real wages were increasing, especially because of NREG and because of the uptake of the construction work in the urban area. So because of NREGA, household income increase plus construction work that came across in the urban areas. So the males in the family used to earn much more than they were earning through NREG and through construction work. Therefore, they asked the women in their household not to go for not to take up any subsidiary work. So that is why, remember, the subsidiary status for women has fallen from 25% to only 5%. So that this is one of the reasons. But apart from that, there are cultural factors like patriarchy. So patriarchy, we have seen that approximately 60% of women in India are attending domestic duties. So one of the reasons could be the social constraint and the patriarchal norms that govern our society. Then there are lesser opportunities for females as well. This is one of the reasons that is being given. But apart from that, the structural transformation that has happened is another reason. Now, what has happened in the structural transformation is that the agricultural employment has become more mechanized. So instead of using manual labor, now a lot of tractors and a lot of these composite machines have come up for harvesting. So because of that, manual labor is less required. If less manual labor is required, then the amount of labor, especially these females who are used for in the harvest period will not be required. Therefore, their participation rate will decline. And apart from the fact that there has been an international fall in the labor intensive industries, especially in India, the textiles and the garment industry. So all of that has led to a decline in the supply of females in the labor force of the country. Now, the manufacturing sector, as I've told you, is the other reason. Going forward towards what has happened, what step has the government taken to improve the female work participation? Now, one of the factors that is that the maternity leave has increased from 12 weeks to 26 weeks. Then you have the Sexual Harassment of Women at Workplace Act. So because of this act, the women who may feel harassed in whether in the public sector or in the private sector, whether in the organized sector or in the unorganized sector. So this gives them kind of a security against sexual harassment. Then you have Mahila Shakti Kendras, in which college student volunteers are asked to empower rural women in the 115 aspirational districts. So this is through, again, encouraging women to participate more in the labor force. Then you have the women helpline number 181. Then apart from that, for female entrepreneurship, you have the schemes like Startup India, you have Mahila E-Heart, you have Pradhan Mantri Mudra Yojana, then you have Stand Up India. So all of these are basically to provide finances, especially collateral free finances to women to establish MSMEs. So this is another factor. Then you have Prime Minister Employment Generation Program, in which women entrepreneurs are provided subsidies in tune of 25% to 30%. And then lastly, you have the National Livelihood Mission, in which one woman from each rural poor household is taken, and she is encouraged to participate in self-help groups. So a lot of women come together, and they can start a particular venture. Something like one of the most successful self-help group ventures was, if you know the term, Lizard Papad. So that started with a self-help group kind of a model. Then coming to health sector. In the health sector, we have had a new policy called National Health Policy 2017, which aims to provide universal health care, good quality health care to people, and the subsequent launch of Ayushman Bharat. Now, Ayushman Bharat has two components. One component is for primary health care, which is the health and wellness centers across India, which is for primary healthcare, and the second is the Pradhan Mantri Arogya Yojana, which is an insurance scheme. So Pradhan Mantri Jan Arogya Yojana, this is the secondary, this is the second program. The first is the primary healthcare centers. This is an insurance scheme, and this insurance scheme is for secondary and tertiary hospitalization. So the healthcare system in India works like you have primary healthcare centers at each village level, or a very smaller level, and then over the top of it you have community hospitals. Then this comprises of the usual village level interface. Then at district level, each district has a hospital, so which is the secondary level, and then you have a tertiary hospital, which is a super specialty hospital. So this is the structure: primary healthcare sector, then you have secondary healthcare, and then you have tertiary healthcare. So primary is the most basic, where you have the Ayushman Bharat through the wellness centers, and these two, for these two issues which cannot be resorted here. So something like a heart attack, or something like a major cancer surgery cannot be treated at the primary healthcare center. So for that, secondary healthcare center, district hospital, or a tertiary healthcare super specialty hospital can take care of that. So super specialty hospital are basically something like AIMS or Safdarjung. These are super specialty hospitals. So for all the diseases which cannot be handled here, the government of India has launched a Pradhan Mantri Jan Arogya Yojana for this, and this is an insurance scheme for up to 5 lakh rupees per family. So if you have any problem, and if you're admitted here, then the government will pay the amount, and you don't need to pay for your treatment. And this is up to 5 lakh rupees. So this is what the government has done in the healthcare sector. Then for preventive healthcare, the government wants to establish 1.5 lakh Ayushman Bharat health and wellness centers by 2022. This is what I talked about, primary healthcare centers, and in which what all will be done: screening, prevention, control, common non-communicable diseases such as hypertension, diabetes, and only 3 kinds of cancers: oral cavity, breast, and cervical cancer. These are the issues that can be treated at the level of primary healthcare center. And for everything else, plus apart from the what the ASHA workers does in terms of maternal, adolescent, and child care services. So this plus whatever ASHA worker, accredited social health workers in the rural areas, whatever they can handle. Apart from that, if they have any other issue, then you can be referred to the secondary sector, which is the district hospital or the tertiary hospitals. These are other schemes which the government of India launched, for example, Fit India and Swachh Bharat Abhiyan. So these are other schemes which the government of India has launched, and the government of India has also banned e-cigarettes. So these are all preventive schemes that the government of India has done. In terms of affordability, as I've already told you, the Pradhan Mantri Jan Arogya Yojana gives 10 crore people of India 5 lakh rupees insurance. Apart from fact, there is another figure which is called as out-of-pocket expenditure. Now, what is this out-of-pocket expenditure? Expenditure which people are making when on average, if they face a health issue. So on an average, people used to spend 62% of the amount of the total health expenditure out of their pocket. So if 100 rupees were spent on an average on healthcare, 62%, 65% of this, 65 rupees of this was being spent privately, in the sense that 35 rupees were being covered by the government, and 65 rupees were to be paid by you in form of medicines, in form of diagnostic tests. So apart from just hospitalization, there are other things which is not covered, so which came out to be 65%. This has reduced to 58% right now, and the government needs to focus more on the primary healthcare center, because 70% of our population stays in the rural areas, and the national health policy also says that 2/3 of the amount of the entire amount on the healthcare has to be spent on this thing. Another key factor for prelims, people who are appearing for prelims, is how do you identify people for Pradhan Mantri Jan Arogya Yojana? It's through the SECC survey on the basis of deprivation and occupational status. Now, just go through all of this. There's nothing much more in this. Then, in terms of medical infrastructure, as we already know that the doctor to population ratio in India is extremely skewed. We have one doctor for 1400, 1500 people, as against the WHO norm of 1:1000. That means we are not producing enough doctors, for which the government has a scheme called Pradhan Mantri Swasthya Suraksha Yojana, which is to augment the tertiary level hospitals, making more AIIMS like institutions. And in general, the government has also started opening more medical colleges so that more number of doctors can be produced. Finally, talking about two more things. One is the housing for all. For housing, the government of India has two schemes: Pradhan Mantri Awas Yojana for Gramin area and for urban area. And that is for by 2022 you want to achieve universal housing. And for sanitation, you have Jal Shakti, Ministry of Jal Shakti, which has targeted that from 2019 to 2020, through behavioral change we will achieve the sanitation program, which is the Bharat Mission, Swachh Bharat Gramin Mission. And we will move from ODF to ODF plus. ODF is open defecation free, that no one defecates in the open. Now we are moving towards a newer model, which is open defecation, whereby open defecation plus, whereby everyone actually uses the toilet, and there is enough resources in the liquid waste management. So this entire was the summary of our discussion on this particular chapter. As I've told you, this chapter is extremely important, especially in terms of the employment sector. So please go through it carefully. Until next time, I'm signing off. Thank you guys, and hope you stay safe. Bye bye.